Are you looking to get your feet wet in Gen AI on your own terms? Check out our free digital course, Build Your Own Custom GPT by HatchWorks. In the course, we teach you step-by-step how to create your own custom GPT so you can start solving some specific problems and use cases in your business with Gen AI. Trust me, you're going to wow your coworkers and probably even yourself with this new skill. Check out the link in the show notes or visit HatchWorks.com to get started. Welcome to Built Right, a podcast by HatchWorks where we help you learn to build the right digital product the right way. In each episode, we'll deconstruct the layers of successful product development, break down popular trends, and offer real advice to help make sure your product is built right. We may not have all the answers, but we've built a lot of digital products across a lot of industries, and we've seen a thing or two. Let's get into it. All right, I am pumped to be joined by Andy Silvestri. He's a true master of his craft with nearly 20 years of experience in digital design, including graphic design, creative design, user experience, customer experience, and even product strategy. He even ran his own customer experience strategy and design firm Field for about 10 years before joining us at HatchWorks to lead our product design practice. And today we're going to get into the crucial role UX, user experience, plays in making sure you're building the right solution, that's a big component of Built Right. But welcome to the show, Andy.
Hey, thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's a pleasure to talk with you as always, and really excited to dive in deeper. It's funny you mentioned Field. That was like another life. So.
I know, and that's actually how we met back in the day when you were running Field. And really excited to get into this. We're going to go deep on UX. Andy is a master of the whiteboard in the workshop. I see myself in awe every time I see him lead a workshop. I'm just like in the back taking notes, like, how is this guy doing this? But y'all are going to love this episode today. But Andy, let's start off like high level, the tipping point of UX, because it does get confused. But what's the goal of UX? What's the goal of user experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, UX is used in a lot of different ways. A lot of people talk about UX, this, that, I think that, there's this general mindset out there that, UX is all about making things easier for your end user, right? And, minimizing clicks and that kind of things. But it's really more about just, I feel, enabling an end user or a user base, right? Like making them have, or giving them the ability to be successful in your solution, coming in, doing what they need to do, getting the information or getting this, getting to completion of a certain task, and getting out, right? That's really it. And so obviously ease of use is a factor of that, but it's really more about enabling your user, because complexity is a good thing sometimes. There are systems that need to be complex because they're trying to convey very complex ideas, or they're trying to allow a user to do very complex tasks, right? So it's not just about how many clicks can we minimize, or, how can we combine things so that it's in one place. It's again, just all about that enablement.
Yeah, that's great insight. And that's a big thing. It's like everybody's trying to get to, let's make this super easy, super painless. Yes, that's good. But I mean, some systems can be complex. It's like, how do you make the complex simple? And that can be a difficult thing to do. That takes a lot of hard work on the research side of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's you touch on a key point there. I think that obviously the further you get in a system, the more complex it becomes. The more specialized whatever it is that you're doing for your users is, the more you need to understand what your users need, right? And you need to be talking with them. So the research component, which I'm sure we'll get way deep in because it's where my passion lies, is a big factor to being successful and to having that validation and that understanding.
And when we talk about the goal of UX, you got different stakeholders. Who are you considering when you're looking at user experience? I mean, people typically go straight to the user, but it's more than that. Who's in your thought process when you're starting your research on the user experience side of things?
Yeah. So, research kind of goes both ways in the sense that you do need to factor in key stakeholders of a business, right? So there is that component of making sure that whatever you're doing within the system, whatever you're creating, for your eventual end users. Those could be external customers, those could be internal employees, that kind of thing, right? They're your user. But the stakeholders do have, business needs that kind of, drive the foundation of a system, so to speak. And so really making sure that there's a consistent kind of narrative or, a specific kind of, objective that you're getting to, and having the buy-in of the business is a big part of it. So that has to be kind of factored into, hey, how are we kind of approach enabling our users? As I was saying, what do we need to offer them? How do they, how are they successful? What does it mean for them to be successful? And how does that refer back to, the success of our business, right? Our platform giving them this ability equals something on the business end, right? And it hits the bottom line somehow. So, again, having both of those threads from a research and an understanding perspective is critically important, I think. And again, part of the process is marrying those together into eventually what becomes, yes, the end user experience.
Yeah. And you hit on it too. Like if you're building a solution, it's got customers, it's got to be viable. It's got to make money. You can keep continuing to offer this thing to your customers. So that's that balancing act where if you sway one way too much on the user side or one way too much on the business side, you can be in a bad spot. It's finding that kind of harmony between the two, your user and your business, something your users love and something that your business loves in terms of being viable and, continuing to be self-sufficient in the future.
Yeah. And I mean, having that feedback loop is critical, right? Because what you want to do is, of course, have continuous research be built into kind of the DNA of how you're approaching the user experience of your product or just your business in general, right? So at the end of the day, you want to have that feedback loop from customers, users, what are they saying? Okay, how are we kind of bringing that back up the chain and, presenting that internally and either debating that or folding it into existing initiatives, or at least having some level of conversation around, hey, this is what our users are saying. We're looking here, but maybe we need to be looking there because of what we're hearing, So again, it's very important to have that as kind of a backbone of how you're approaching creating the experience, updating the experience, having the experience expand, all those kinds of.
Yeah, and it's kind of a good segue into the next thing I was wanting to hit on. So you talk about a UX mindset, right? This thing's a mindset. It's not just reserved for a couple folks in like the product designer UX or side of the house. It's a mindset within the whole organization. Take us through that. What do you mean by a UX mindset, and go down that
I think. Yeah, I think there's a couple layers to that, really. On the surface, there's obviously the idea of like, hey, we want to be presenting a good experience, right? We want to delight customers. You hear that all the time. And then there's like kind of this idea of like, do the UX, like just UX it.
Do it, Andy. Just do it.
Yeah, just do it. But I think that, like a user experience mindset really starts with that kind of design thinking mindset as well, which is kind of, starting with empathy for your user, understanding what they need, right? Getting inside of their heads, kind of, walking in their shoes. And a lot of customers, a lot of times, like just assume they know, right? Like they're just like, oh yeah, we get it. Like that's cool. We're going to just do this because we know that this is what customers want. And they, you start to kind of peel the onion and it's something completely different, right? So, I guess like in a way, you start with that empathy, you understand kind of walk in the shoes of your customer, your user. And then from there, you start to define, and you from there start, you continue to iterate and prototype and present things back to the customers and continue to kind of narrow the focus, right? Or get more and more validation. And so really like that's the cyclical, when we say a mindset, that's really what you have to have throughout the process of creating your product or your solution, right? You can't just go in with assumptions and lean on those. You have to have that validation. So the more you can kind of just have that, again, as a directive of we're going to empathize, we're going to get inside the head and try to understand, not just ask them questions, but try to understand who they are, right? Like realistically, like who is my customer? There's a lot of emphasis sometimes put on creating personas out of your user base, right? And that's a great tool for organizations that need to have kind of that crystallization of understanding. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be that cut and dry or that polished. You can just still have, a running understanding and a narrative of like who your user is just by talking to them, right? And documenting that and continuing the process. So that's really what I mean about it being a mindset. It's more about, we're not just here to do the UX, meaning we need some wireframes, we need some user flows. We need to understand. We need to have that understanding kind of be the backbone of what we're doing.
Yeah, we weren't planning on going here, but give me your hot take on personas. The Jill that's 40 years old and likes a comedy.
I mean, I think that they can be very valuable especially when you have a larger organization that needs to kind of rally around an understanding, and you need to disseminate this persona to multiple business units or multiple groups within an organization that might not be very well, very closely tied to product or design or, the kind of, management side of a product, right? I've seen this happen with large, typically much larger groups, but, you can create marketing campaigns around your personas for internal use, right? You can do that. And I think it's very valuable in those organizations when you're trying to kind of, again, disseminate a particular perspective on our customers, just so it's top of mind for your employees and the people that are working within your organizations. So again, I think that they have their place. They do absolutely have value. But it's not necessarily something that always has to happen. There's this idea that even in the early phases of just user definition, meaning that, hey, our users are this, this, and this, and we have like a, kind of a dossier on them, doesn't have to be to the level of it's personified as, like you said, Jill from Ottawa who, does this or that, right? So, but I mean, again, to your question, they do have very real value. And I think they're, an important part of the overarching universe that is user experience.
And so much of it's like, what is their goal? What are they trying to achieve? Starts getting into that path of your jobs to be done. That's where you start getting those nuggets of how you, architect and design a solution for your users.
Mm-hmm. And the cool thing, actually, I mean, just kind of keep digging on personas for a second.
Yeah.
Like, the cool thing is that they can evolve, right? And so like you can have them established one way from like an initial body of work. And again, if you're keeping that mindset, you're continually doing your research, you're continually talking to customers, you can bring that back into reevaluating your persona. You might have started with saying, hey, these are the ways we thought they sliced out. Maybe that's not true anymore. Maybe there's more of maybe there's more gray area than you initially thought. Maybe there's more personas that are using your platform, right? Maybe there's more ways in which they're using your platform or your solution that you never really thought of, that you're learning again through this continuous discovery and research.
Yeah, and you mentioned a word a little bit ago, assumptions, which great to have assumptions. You got to have some ideas, some hypotheses. I think where we see breakage happen is you're not validating the assumptions. Take me through that, the importance of, validating, because I can't tell you how many times, and we've been burned by this in our past. I'm sure you have too, where, you think your customer and you have an assumption and you run with it, and then you build something, you find out later that it's not the case.
Yeah. Right. And again, like that is a very common and it's a very attractive way to approach, creating something, right? Is let's go as fast as we can. Like we know what we know what we think we know, right? And it's typically, there's maybe there's a perception that to do the proper level of research and getting the right, data to validate your directions will take a very long time, or it will be a very significant investment. But that's typically not the case. Realistically, going into even a handful of conversations with customers or, your end users can be extremely valuable to getting some level of that validation. And again, there are a lot of thoughts out there around what's the proper level of research that you need to be doing? How many people should you be talking to? Going all the way up into, you need to talk to at least 24 or 36. There's usually some divisible by 12. I don't know. But in my experience, honestly, even after, doing some pretty pointed interviews with, again, your target customer. So that's a pretty big caveat, is that you have to be targeted in who you're talking to, right? Which comes with, you kind of get there from earlier definition. But long story short is, if you even talk to half a dozen people, 6 to 7, you're going to start to see themes emerge that should marry to helping validate your assumptions or disprove them, right? So if you talk to 6 people and they're going one direction and you were thinking the other, it's a pretty good indication that, you talk to 6 more or 20 more or 50 more, you're going to get that same kind of trend, right? So, I mean, at the end of the day, it's a lot about just, okay, how quickly or how efficiently or how easily, so to speak, can we get people's feedback? Can we talk to them? How can we access our end user, right? Is that a 15-minute phone call? Is that, in terms of if it's an internal project, can we talk with coworkers who are using this platform or this system, right? Can we spin up something that's a really low effort, kind of objective really, and like get them into just the conversation, right? Like that's really it. I think that it doesn't have to be some big, long, drawn out, like we got to plan out 6 months of research and we got to do this and that. And, but as long as you're staying on top of it, right? And you're not just being like, all right, we did 6, we're good. Like you have the ability to continue to do that, right? Over the course of your product I think that's enough to just keep it going, right? To always have that touch point. And have it again be like we're talking about with being a mindset, have it be a routine part of your mindset and your approach and your process.
Yes. Yeah. So, all right, two separate threads here that I think are really interesting. The first one being, you mentioned a minute ago, when people think of UX and starting, like they want to hit the ground running, they want to start giving value, they want to start building. And a lot of people think that the UX side of it is going to slow them down. But talk through that. It's actually a way to save some money in the long run if you can validate some stuff up front versus building, rebuilding, and all of that.
Right. I mean, like I was just saying, I think the temptation is let's save the money, let's start quick, and let's just kind of, start doing things and creating things, right? 99% of the time, if you do it that way without, again, any sort of validation, any sort of, feedback or input from your end user, you're going to be changing things sooner than you think. So you're going to lose that money that you saved up front by redoing or having to rebuild or, God forbid, completely scrap something that you thought was the right way, right? So, that's just one way to look at it. You're either making the investment up front or you're making the investment later, and it's much more painful the further down the path you get.
Yeah. The pain definitely escalates. So in that same vein, UX can be daunting for a lot of folks that are looking to take this on, bring it into their organization, but it doesn't have to be. Like how can folks get started? Like what's the MVP of UX for an organization that has not done it in the past? It doesn't have to be this big crazy thing. Talk us through like where's the best spot to get started in kind of a minimal way?
Yeah. I would say the best place to get started is to really do that kind of look in the mirror and say, how can we define our end user or our end users? Like really just start with that definition, right? Because they're going to be the ones who are ultimately determining whether or not you're successful, right? So at the very least, drafting that up and saying, okay, this is who we're going for, right? This is our core target, right? And if that's multiple, targets, that's fine. Doing the same process for multiple users is fine. Getting that kind of as a baseline is something that's really just about, that look in the mirror, the internal kind of like, let's do this. Let's make sure that we have the right understanding of who we're doing this for, who we're creating this for. Sometimes, there's existing users that you have, of course, that it's easier for certain organizations than others. Or you're starting from scratch from a cocktail napkin. So from there, then it's about, okay, what are we enabling them to do? Like I was saying earlier, what are the jobs to be done, so to speak? That's a framework that you can use. What do they have to be doing in this platform, the solution, in order to be successful? And can we keep that at can we start to think about what that is once we've kind of defined that a bit? What is that in terms of prioritization? How do we look at that from like a phased approach, right? So we know that there might be a dozen things that this user needs to accomplish to be successful in various ways. But what's the most important thing? That 80-20 rule. Like, what if we were to, frame up this 20% of a platform or a solution? What would give them 80% of the value of it, right? Like that kind of mindset, I think is helpful. And all of this is really whiteboard work. It's nothing that needs a super fancy degree or anything like that. It's more conversation and analysis. And again, like retrospection, and making sure that all the stakeholders that are involved in this product are present and have input, right? And again, from there, you start to get some traction, right, around who this customer or user is, what are their needs and pain points. You might even at this point, if you can, bring in some conversations with those types of individuals to, again, start that validation cycle, right? And from there, then it's like, okay, cool. This is framing up as a thing that makes sense. And we've started again to get that validation, that understanding. We're aligned internally. Our users who we've kind of defined have given us this level of input. We can start to look at bringing in the more formal process of let's start to frame up things to show them as prototypes or as wireframes or whatever it might be. Concept. Let's do that high level conceptual work and continue the process. So you're just kind of ratcheting up the fidelity a little bit, but like it's the same kind of process of like, okay, we started with like just words, we've gotten validation, we've gotten people involved that, it makes sense to where we're going, right? Now let's start to show them things, right? And those could be crude sketches. It doesn't have, you don't have to be using fancy high-end tools for this. There's a lot of, a million tools out there that allow you to do this kind of work, that's really the process. And just kind of, again, like I was saying, ratcheting up the fidelity, getting a little bit more and more clarity and validation as you go along and keeping that going until eventually you're like, hey, this is the system. And, we have a very clear picture of what we're going to do first. And then you start to get into, of course, implementing that thing, right? So that's where, how UX turns into user interface design, but it also then starts to become a delivery and a development kind of process. So, but you can prototype all the way through that, right? Which is great. You can do so in a very crude manner, if you have to. It's not like, again, like there is a certain level of fidelity that you have to show people a concept, right? I guess the one caveat there would be that just make sure that whatever your user is, whomever they may be, that they can consume what it is that you're presenting to them from a concept, right? Like, sometimes your user base is savvy enough to understand what you're trying to insinuate through a very crude wireframe or a very rough sketch of something. Other times that might not be the case, right? So you might have to, you might be more successful going into those kinds of scenarios with a more polished, maybe kind of prototype that's maybe more clear, maybe more direct. But again, that's part of you as an organization starting from that basis of understanding your user and saying, what do they need to be successful and how can we present them options or concepts and ideas that make sense to them so that we get the optimal amount of feedback in the right way.
Yeah. And so many good points there. And you don't need like this focus group thing that's this big, expensive, drawn out thing. Just talk to some customers, start there. And I don't know about you, but for me, it's all about the qualitative. Like you can only glean so much info from a survey. Yes, they have their purpose, but the qualitative talking, picking up on these nuances, I'm almost thinking we need some type of guide or tool because you see Andy work a customer interview. It's a thing of beauty. So maybe by the time we air this, we'll have something out there for that. But yeah, it's powerful and it's this process. And this is where it gets interesting. It gets back to that concept of the mindset, right? This is not a one and done thing. This is not something we do in the beginning. All right, we're done, move on to the next thing. It's this concept of continuous discovery and continuous delivery on the build side. This is a Tim Herabig thing that I know you're a big proponent of, but it becomes part of the organization's like ethos. It permeates the entire organization. But talk us through that concept of continuous discovery. It's touch points throughout all of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's interesting there is that, at any one time you have those two threads going. You have discovery and delivery, so to speak, right? And at any one time, they're kind of like one hand washes the other, right? Discovery is being done in a way to inform the next phase of delivery. Delivery is being done in order to create artifacts and elements that could be used for discovery, right? So it's this interesting, like kind of, ebbs and flow. And again, like the intensity of one or the other is dependent upon where you are in the life cycle of the product, right? So, I think it's again, like you were saying, this mindset, having that understanding of like, how are your teams structured? When you start to get into like teams like we have at HatchWorks, where we have, a discovery and a definition product team working in tandem with a delivery team from an engineering perspective. That team is one team realistically. And every single day there's an ebb and flow of like, what are we using to inform how we develop the next phase of the work? What are we hearing from research that we've been doing with customers to inform how we pivot, if we need to, or if we're enhancing something or, creating something new. And similarly, it's, from a delivery perspective of like, hey, we can now demo this thing, right? We have this thing ready to go that we could use as, again, an artifact in validation, or might spin up things in a sandbox, to use as again, like prototype, So, I think that's a really interesting, when you get into kind of the fluidity of that kind of team and that kind of process, it all just becomes this cyclical thing where you're kind of inputting in what you get. It's going through this idea of, defining and building and validating, and then you're delivering, right? And continuously doing that. So, it's excellent. That's the way to do it. So
you always hear about the CI/CD, but the continuous discovery piece often gets overlooked because it's not the, technical piece of it. It's that dance, that tango between problem space and solution space. And it's ever kind of expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. And that's the best products out there. That's the process they follow. It's not this waterfall manner. One area, so you think of UX, a lot of people are always thinking like, I got this back of the napkin idea, I've drawn it out, we're going to like design this thing and build it. But when you're modernizing something existing, you're redesigning something existing, UX is one of the most critical parts, right? Because your users are typically using your system in unintended ways you don't even know. Go a bit deeper in terms of like what to consider when you're redesigning something existing. Same principles apply, but there's some nuance.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and it's a really fascinating topic because, to your point, when you have something that's established and you start to peel the onion, and again, like you go through the process of talking with your users, you're going to see all the duct tape and the paper clips that have been put in there and all the things that people are maybe they're using a third party system to kind of augment what they're doing within your platform and kind of coming back to it. I mean, you'll see some really, typically in the older the system is, you'll see some very unique and interesting workflows that you may not even be aware of, right? And so again, that's where it's critically important in modernizing something and making it new, that you take the time to unpack all of that, right? Because there is a very real challenge in getting people to give up those processes that they have established. It's kind of baked into their workflow, especially, we see this a lot in internal software that's, that groups use for, you name it internally, right? Where there's a very isolated user group, maybe, or, I wouldn't say isolated, but a very specific user group that's using this thing to do a certain thing. And they have created their own ways to be more efficient, more effective, right? And you're hearing things in the pain point side as as an owner of this product or, of this initiative that you want to solve, right? But the pain points that surface to the top are really the downstream of what's happening underneath that folks are doing with your platform. So it's really about, okay, we got to unpack it. We got to do some digging. And that can be a daunting thing to think about, right? Like, where do you start, right? Again, though, it's about just going into, talking with your users and maybe shadowing them on their process. We've done this with customers where they've been in the middle of modernization, and there's been interviews with prime stakeholders and also users of certain platform, where, they're trying to get everybody to go onto a new platform that's kind of being built in parallel. And more modern interface, bells and whistles, looks very fancy. It's really nice. It was a great design for the new system, but nobody was using it because it didn't do like a handful of the critical things that people were doing with the old system that hadn't yet been addressed in the new system. So you think about that. If you had known that from the get-go, that's how you would have prioritized your roadmap, right? So, again, that's where it's one thing to start an initiative and say, we're going to just rebuild this. We're going to take what we have and we're going to do a new coat of paint to it. Everybody's going to move into the house and it's going to be awesome. And everybody's going to live there and be happy. But, you got to get all your stuff out of the old house, and you got to move it over. So, that's really it. I think that's why it's critically important to take this mindset into a modernization project, right? Because you have to be able to do that deeper dive. And from that, use that prioritization to inform where you're going to start phase one, right? And again, like 80-20, if we do this in phase one, that accomplishes 80%, cool. We can deprioritize these other things that we thought might have been the focus, but are really more of nice to haves when we really unpacked what our customers are doing with the platform, right?
Yeah, and there's so much opportunity in how users are using your system today. I can't tell you how many times you and the team have gone in and started talking to people using the system today, and you come back with, hey, they're doing the XYZ thing. It's not in the platform. And, our customer, our stakeholders, like, are you serious? It's right. Like the surprise factor. It's like
everything funnels back to like Excel or something. Like, they're using Excel. What are you talking about?
Yeah. That opens up new ideas though, which is cool because you're like, oh, well, we could solve that problem with our solution. And that's where the real fun stuff starts. And with an existing solution, like human nature is weird, right? You got the endowment effect in play where people are more likely to retain something they have, even if something else is better because they just value it more. And then loss aversion, they value the pain of a loss more than something gaining something, right? It's like the whole adage of a bird in the hand's worth two in the bush.
Yeah. Go with what you know, right? I mean, like and it's like this gets into, it gets into like really a habit breaking kind of process, right? Like you have to prove that the new thing you're doing is truly better for that adoption to happen, right? And it can't just be the same thing with a better coat of paint, right? It has to be better for me to be like, okay, I'm going to make the switch. And this happens, across the board with any sort of interaction, any sort of product that you or I use or anybody, right? It's like, I'm big on Sonos. I use Sonos all the time because I feel like the interface and the interactions and the integrations are fantastic for putting music throughout my house. But like, I have friends who use other, services and they're like, you got to, jump over to this. And I'm like, no way, man, I'm invested. So, yeah.
And last thing, and we'll wrap it. This has been awesome, but the bar is at the level of what customers experience with other things. It's not your thing, but their bar, it could be how they experience stuff with Apple or Google or name your thing. Like that's the bar that they expect. So that's another reason user experience is so critical.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think that, people are used to, we live in a fantastic time. If I sound like some old timer, but we live in a very interesting time where we have all of these fantastic, like there are groups out there, like you mentioned, Apple, and, they're putting they have put a ton of work into really nailing user experience, right? And the proof is in the pudding. Their products are ubiquitous, right? Everybody knows them. Everybody uses them. There's wars about, Apple versus Android, like this, they're an entity within like just human experience, right? It's not just user experience. And so from that, like realistically, you're being measured, whether you like it or not, on that bar. Like you said, you can't, you're coming into the game with your service or your solution. You have to, it's reasonable to expect your users to expect that kind of experience, right? So again, the more you can kind of adopt and really, study and understand what it means to have good user experience. Again, it's not about visuals. It's not even about ease of use, right? It's about true and utter enablement, right? the more you can understand, the more you can kind of like ingrain that into what you're doing with your product or your solution, the better off you'll be, because then you're going to be right up there with those heavyweights that have been doing it for years and years and years.
Yeah, and not to end on a daunting note there, you definitely just get started with, talk to your customers. You have these examples out there too. Look, tertiary to other things, even outside of your category. There's so many great experiences out there you can tap into. But yeah, Andy, this has been awesome. There's so many rabbit holes I want to dig deeper into, but we'll save those for some future episodes. We'll definitely have you on again, but thanks for joining us.
Yeah, let's do it again.
Built Right.
Thanks, Matt. Yeah, it's been a pleasure. And anytime you want to talk, you know where to find me.
Yep. Sounds good. Talk to you later, Andy.
All right. See ya.
Thanks for listening to Built Right. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. For more info on Built Right, visit us at HatchWorksBuiltRight.com. Big news, season 2 of the Built Right podcast is right around the corner, launching on February 6th. And in this season, we're going all in on generative AI. The guest list is insane, ranging from international AI speakers, founders of Gen AI products, experts in specific domains of Gen AI, and leaders across industries. And we'll even have some HatchWorks' own Gen AI leaders as we dig into our generative-driven development methodology. This season isn't just for non-techies though. Whether you're an AI guru or just AI curious, we're going to bring tactical real-world applications of how you can apply Gen AI in your work and your life that anyone can understand and relate to. And P.S., Gen AI will impact every single industry. So no matter your domain, you need to make sure you set a reminder every other week to listen to the next episode of the Built Right podcast. While you're waiting for season 2, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so you don't miss an episode. And give us a follow on LinkedIn to join the conversation and give us ideas on specific Gen AI topics you want to hear about. So get ready. Built Right Season 2 Gen AI Edition is coming your way.